Hi there, welcome back to ADSR Massive Tutorials. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, get yourself subscribed, youtube.com/ADSR Tuts. So for today and next few tutorials, we're going to look at setting up a MIDI controller with Massive and assigning parameters, kind of MIDI controllers to various different parameters in Massive. Some of the advantages of doing this is, say if you're using Massive in a live setup, you could have kind of different Midi Cc setups, basically controlling different parameters in Massive. Very useful for a live setup, or if you wanted to record some of your automation in live, and rather than kind of drawing in your filter sweeps with a mouse and stuff like that, you can actually just assign MIDI controllers to parameters in Massive and then just, you know, record some of those kind of filter sweeps in live. Just much more of a human feel when you record automation in that way, I find. You can then go and edit it afterwards. So we'll be looking at all of that stuff. One of the advantages of using Massive, kind of a MIDI setup with Massive, MIDI controllers in Massive, is you could have different setups, different MIDI setups. So if you had like a home studio setup and you had a big MIDI controller with maybe 16 rotary knobs, you could assign 16 rotary knobs to different parameters in Massive. And then if you went on your live setup, you just had a small MIDI controller with a few rotary knobs, then you can have a different MIDI setup for your live kind of performances and stuff. So you're looking at ways of doing that, and it's very kind of straightforward. With Massive in standalone mode here, it's very straightforward to set up or assign a MIDI controller. So one thing first I should point out, actually, I've got Machine Mark II here as my MIDI controller, and if you have Machine Mark II, or if you have your MIDI controller and it's not kind of Massive's not reading it, or it's not reading any of the kind of MIDI information that you're sending, you need to go in here, go to your File drop down menu, Audio MIDI Settings, go to your MIDI here, and you have all your kind of MIDI controllers in here. So I've got my key station, that's my kind of controller keyboard, my Machine Mark II, this Duet, that's my sound card. So what you need to do here, see Machine Mark II controller, you need to make sure the status is on there. Mine's already on, but if it says off there in the status, just click it, you get a little drop down menu, make sure it's on. So we're going to be receiving, in Massive, we're going to be receiving MIDI information from my Machine Mark II controller. So hit OK there, and very simple now. All I need to do is right click, control click, go Midi Learn here, hit Midi Learn, and then go to one of the 8 kind of rotary knobs on my Machine Mark II controller, say the first one, move that around, and it's now assigned to this wavetable position on oscillator 1. I could then go back in here and you can right click on that controller again, or that parameter there, and control OS1 position. It's telling me Midi Cc ID, it's giving me the Midi Cc ID. I can then remove that CC, so if I remove that MIDI info now, moving this rotary controller again, nothing's happening, I've removed that MIDI information. So it's as simple as that. So we could go ahead and go Midi Learn, move this controller, pulse width, Midi Learn, move that controller, the amp of this oscillator, Midi Learn, move that controller, and then we've got all these controllers assigned in here. And the next step really for this kind of thing is to save your MIDI setups. So let's just stop that Midi Learn there. Yeah, that's been removed. Remove that Midi Cc information. Remove this. And the way we could set up one of our own little MIDI setups here, so you could have individual setups, is go to this File drop down menu, Options, and then within these options go to the MIDI tab, and then in here we could set up our kind of our user Midi Cc setups here really. So it's on my default CC. So if we created a new one in here, called it Massive Home Studio Controller, and hit OK there, and now let me hit save as well, I think, and then OK, and then we can assign some parameters in here. And so this is our home studio control. I mean, what's useful is we've got macro controls. We've got 8 macro controls. Machine Mark II, I have 8 of these rotary knobs. So I could go along here and go Midi Learn for the cutoff. And then the cutoff is assigned to my first rotary knob. And the second macro control vibrato, and that's assigned to the second rotary knob, Midi Learn. And keep going through here, through all 8 macro controls, going along my Machine Mark II controller and just assigning the rotary knobs there. So I've got these 8 rotary knobs controlling all these macros, which is great. I think we need to do this as well. Go back into your options and hit save on that. Massive home studio controller, hit OK. And the great thing about this is now is if I go through and browse to a different patch in here, go back, even though it's a completely different patch what we've loaded up there, it saves that MIDI info, those Midi Cc assignments, it saves that now. So I can scroll to a different patch. And I'm still got all those MIDI controllers assigned there. And the way to change that is to go back into the File drop down menu, Options, go to the MIDI, select a different one of these. So I've only got one user set up in there, but I could go to this machine controller, load that, hit OK. And now I'm moving the first rotary kind of knob on the Machine Mark II controller, and it's now on this setup, it's assigned to intensity. So you can have different setups, which is great. So just great for live kind of use, great for kind of home studio use, or taking, you know, your MIDI controller elsewhere, or your studio if you have a laptop, taking that elsewhere, having different MIDI setups, really useful. The reason I've kind of done this in standalone mode, it's this kind of MIDI setup stuff is a little bit lumpy with Logic Pro X. We're going to be looking at that in the next few tutorials, recording automation and stuff like that, but it is a little bit lumpy, but it should be very straightforward. Massive's kind of Nova Instruments have made it very straightforward. I think just with the latest update of Logic, going from Logic 9 to Logic Pro X, which is the DAW that I use, it's a little bit lumpy with MIDI assignments and controller assignments and stuff, but it should be very straightforward to set that up, and then you've got all your controls set up and you can start recording some automation in live. So the next tutorial, we're going to be looking at advantages of doing that, just recording some filter sweeps in live and then maybe going back and editing some of the MIDI info and stuff like that. But that's how to set up a kind of MIDI controller with Massive there, and just save your kind of MIDI setups. And you know, like I said, very straightforward. Just right click, Midi Learn, move the controller. Alright, thanks for watching this tutorial. Any questions, get in touch, let us know, and I hope to see you in the next video. Alright, thanks, bye.